But people need a chance, and we don't have one right now. Not going to be anything left for the small business owners in the middle class.
So Tiffany, tell us what you do.
My name is Tiffany Cianci, and I was the owner of a Little Gym franchise for 6 years. Our company suffered because we were all forced to close down. My gym in particular suffered one of the longest closures in the US at almost 17 months, mandated by my county and my state. Because of that, our company was susceptible to a takeover by private equity. And when they bought our company, they immediately told us we had to pay them more money and buy new services that our contracts didn't allow for, and that if we didn't sign them, we would lose everything. And they knew we had personal guarantees on our franchise agreements and all of our leases. So we got really scared, and we decided to stand together. We stood really strong, and we tried to be brave, and we hired a lawyer to create a mediation scenario. The very next day, they instead decided to make an example out of me to scare everyone else, and they terminated my franchise.
What was the investment firm that purchased?
It was Ross Perot's family firm. It was Nantucket, it was Princeton, and AHR Capital. And then all of their stakes were purchased by Seidler Private Equity. And they do it under an umbrella called Unleash Brands. But Seidler Private Equity is the family that owns the Padres.
And what did they do to you?
Well, immediately after terminating my contract, they sent letters to all of the members of the franchise association. They told them that I abused children. They told them that I was stealing money from the association. They told them I owed the corporate office thousands and thousands of dollars. None of that was true, and they were found guilty of defamation later. But they convinced everyone I knew and loved that I was not the proud business owner that I was and the person serving my community. They paid my landlord a $120,000 bribe to take away my location. For any small businesses that stood by me and tried to support me, they had DLA Piper, their law firm, send letters saying they would be next if they didn't remove their support from my trying to continue to fight to save my business. It's been rough. We're going to be bankrupt at the end of it, and that's what they wanted. That's the victory they needed, right? Because no matter how strong I stand, they're going to be able to use me to say you're next to everyone after me.
Private equity is now doing this all over the country to franchise owners. It's kind of the last frontier for private equity of destroying small business in this country.
Correct. In the last 5 years, private equity acquisition of franchises have doubled and tripled each year, year over year. And at this point, the majority of franchise brands that are not publicly traded have been acquired by private equity or are in the process of shopping to private equity. And the result is that the independently owned small business owners have no way to defend themselves against these billion-dollar corporations that come in. Most of us signed contracts with small family-owned franchises, mid-sized franchises, never conceiving of the idea that we would be across the table from someone that could spend any amount of money to make us submit.
Now, this has hurt small business in this country, but it also has hurt the consumer. It's destroying our communities, and it is allowing ultimately criminal behavior by Wall Street billionaires to just vacuum clean the wealth from America's Main Street.
It is. Main Street wealth is being strip mined and funneled out of the communities that those small businesses would serve and into the pockets of billionaires. No matter how much dangerous debt loading they do, no matter how much reckless borrowing they do or squeezing they do, there's just no risk and there's no regulation and there's no oversight because we can't see anything they're doing. The government and the SEC can't see anything that they're doing. So nobody knows how bad it really is.
How many franchisees are there in the United States?
They represent millions and millions and millions of employees. People don't realize small things are franchises. Little tiny coffee carts are franchises. And it's being consolidated and consolidated. by these private equity firms to squeeze out any mom and pops that could compete with the franchises. So it's restricting competition, and it's setting prices across the spectrum of services, everything from home services to car services to insurance services to real estate brokerages, schools. There's one private equity firm right now that owns 37 brands of daycare centers, and the daycare costs have spiraled out of control in the United States, but they are killing it in revenue. Everybody's saying childcare is unaffordable. Their employees aren't being paid well, but those private equity firms, they are making money, lots of money. Nursing care facilities and rehab facilities are the same way. Everything is being squeezed, and people don't realize all of these things are franchises, and they're all being acquired.
It's just theft right in front of us.
Yep.
Theft by billionaires.
Theft by billionaires, and billionaires get richer and communities get poorer. Our trust in mega corporations is something like 8 to 9%, but our trust in small businesses nationwide is between 65 and 81%. They saw that, they saw the writing on the wall, and they said, well, clearly that's what we've got to take next. And we've got to convince everybody that's what we are. And they decided that they needed to invest in the things we cared about most. Because as long as we were emotionally tied to the cost, no matter how much they raised it, we would pay it. Veterinary care, children's pediatric care, daycare centers, children's services, funeral services, the things you'll pay for no matter what. That's what they turn their attention to, because you will take, and they said, even if you won't pay it, you'll take out the loan to pay it. And then they bought all the finance companies too. And here we are. One of the hardest things is that they're buying up these large swaths of industries in regions, right? There's a company called Champions Group right now in the Southwest as a really good example. You can look them up online. They've purchased dozens of HVAC companies that were family owned for 4 decades, 5 decades, had great reputations in their community and had large market shares in their community. 25, 30, 40 vans going out. And they bought all of them. And then they paid for the name, image, likeness of the former owners as part of the deal. And when you go to any of the websites for all of these HVAC companies, they all still say they're small businesses, locally owned and operated, things like, we serve our community because we're part of our community. But now they have unified software across all of them. And so no matter who you call for a quote on, let's say, a frozen line on your air conditioner, if the first one comes out and says $1,600, and you say, oh my gosh, that was only $400 the last time this happened. And they say, oh, COVID, supply issues, nobody's gonna say greedflation, right? They say, but if you want a second opinion, call one of them, see what they say. You have no idea that they're owned by the same company, same private equity firms, and the next guy comes out and says $1,580. And you say, I don't have that kind of money. They say, don't worry, we'll finance it for you. Because they bought the finance company too, that's fine.
So what's the status of your lawsuit now?
They filed against me in a sealed arbitration in AAA. AAA is the American Arbitration Association. It's a private organization that gets contracts with big corporations to act like judges, but instead of having access to a judge as a right, you have to pay for access to that judge, and you have to pay dearly. Our judge charged $27,000 a week for his time. And as a small business owner, no one can survive that, They spent somewhere between $6 and $9 million to wage the case on me that they did. And I run a business that, makes $1,000, $1,500 a month in a good month. We don't do it for the money, we do it because we serve, right? And so they brought the case there. They just abused the system to raise costs and raise costs and raise costs.
Did you submit witnesses?
Yep. We submitted a list.
And the judge disallowed them?
He disallowed all of my witnesses. He even tried to disallow my husband, who was a litigant. Yeah, I wasn't allowed anyone except my own attorney. They had dozens of witnesses.
Yeah, this is something that we're seeing all over the country with all these big corporations now in their contracts. All the corporations that have contracts with hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans, they're inserting arbitration clauses that prevent class action suits from being filed against them, that prevent multi-district litigation. So if they're stealing from you, if they're doing something that's underhanded, you can no longer sue them in a class action suit and force them to reform that behavior. you instead have to go to an arbitrator, and your experience is pretty typical of what happens. They can bankrupt you in the process, and that they can make sure that they can get away with actions that are essentially criminal. They're mass theft from millions of customers, and that you then have to pay for the judge. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court has upheld this. The current Supreme Court is very, very business friendly.
Yes.
There is a recent case that's headed up to the Supreme Court, but the chances are it is going to also end up being upheld by the court. But it's really taken the power away from Americans and shifted it to large corporations.
Yeah.
Since you've become kind of famous in this space as the franchisee who actually is willing to take the heat, have other franchisees talked to you and shared their stories?
Starting literally the day after I was on the cover of the New York Times, people started contacting me from everywhere saying, this happened to me, I signed an NDA, this happened to me. People started sending me case files, documents, asking if I could tell their story, asking if I could help them. It's in a sealed case. There's documents that show that the CEO was discussing pulling a harness checker on a zip line in these big trampoline parks, and the safety team had said, nope, don't do that. And it was gonna save, I think, and I'm saying approximately $10,000 a year, and in this document, it clearly stated that it was a few days or a week later, a little girl in Ahwatukee, Arizona, fell off that zip line and broke almost every bone in her body and suffered brain damage.
A 7-year-old girl fell off one of the zip line rides.
Here, this is a look at the Sky Ride attraction. It's a zip line that twists and turns inside the facility.
And then I searched in the news, and it happened in states all across the US. But all of those children's parents signed them in at the trampoline park. And guess what every sign-in iPad had?
An arbitration clause.
An arbitration clause, a confidentiality agreement, non-disparagement agreement, and they were all forced into arbitrations. And when you can't see the bad conduct of huge corporations, little girls fall 28 feet from a zip line to a concrete floor and lose their future. Because when someone you're opposed to can spend 10 or 20 or 30 million dollars on a lawsuit and you've just lost everything, you have no way to fight. You can't pay the judge if you don't have $30,000 for your trial, so you don't get to go. So everybody signs the NDA and everybody walks away. And that has to change.
I know a lot of class action lawyers who are now looking at other careers because these arbitration clauses are make it so nobody can make a complaint anymore, no matter what a corporation does to you, no matter how unjustly they act, no matter how criminally they behave, no matter how blatantly they steal from you or they fix the game against you. Class action torts were a pillar of the regulatory system in this country. They were the ultimate way, because you can always capture the regulatory agency.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the corporations had some modicum of decency and propriety and humanity, because they knew that if they behaved badly enough, that their customers, if they poisoned people, if they dismembered them, if they lost their limbs, if they systematically stole from them, ultimately they would get caught and a lawyer would sue them.
Yeah.
And round up all these different cases where they were systematically doing that and then litigate. And now they've all putting in these arbitration clauses. Everybody's doing it now. And it's going to make it so that they literally can get away with murder. Part of the libertarian credo is that we should get rid of government, and if somebody harms you, you can sue them. And that will keep everybody in line. But if they can hide what they're doing from the public by forcing everybody to sign an NDA And if they can stop you from suing them and punish you if you do, all you have is just this elevation of corporate power over over every other value of our society. And we all become commodities.
But it's not too late to turn it around. The problem is that their money, their hooks are in so deep, so deep. Just on the carried interest loophole, they've spent 70 million, private equity firms have spent 70 million in lobbying dollars in just the last couple of years. Something called a carried interest loophole. That means they're allowed to cash out their investments in as little as a year, which meant that they would come in and get as much money out as they could in that year and then toss it to somebody else. One, that's no way to do business. You need long-term success for a business to thrive. That's how we lost Payless Shoes and how we lost Toys R Us. The company that bought my franchise has changed hands twice in 2 years. That's where we're at. It's just trade, 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 squeeze, trade, wash, rinse, repeat.
So how do we fix it?
Well, there's a lot of ways I think we could fix it. One of the most important things we could do, not for franchises, but for all of the problems we have with leverage buyouts and private equity, is to create joint liability in the failure of businesses. Right now, when you see a private equity firm, they create an LLC that protects them. So if everything here goes bankrupt, it doesn't matter because they're going to cash their money out in the first year. They're already whole.
So how do you shift liability to the private equity firms?
We would have to pass a law that creates maximum debt loads, for instance, or debt ratios, or creates a test or a metric, just like we have for banks, for whether or not their liquidity can support their assets and their risks. One quick way and efficient way for us to do this is to simply make them start holding their investments longer. You shouldn't be trading businesses every year. It's not good for our economy. We could start, for instance, protecting franchisees' ability to associate. We could codify that at a federal level and let the FTC oversee that, just like there's unions. We could protect their associations. There are dozens of ways that we could create oversight. Okay, so it used to be that if there were ever more than 35 investors in a private equity, in a private investment firm, they had to report to the SEC. Then it was expanded to 100. Now there is no cap on it. If we could go back to that and just rein in how many private investors they're allowed before they have to report, that would change things as well. There are so many ways that we could pursue it, but right now when you talk to literally almost any politician, this is a non-starter. Senator Cortez Masto is the only person I know of in the Senate trying to do anything. And she drafted a law called an SBA transparency law that would allow potential small business owners to see how often these private equity acquired franchisees or any franchisees loans are failing or defaulting. And she can't get any co-sponsors for it, even though we've been able to show that now thousands of these loans are defaulting every month and the taxpayers are picking up the bill. And the bankruptcies are taking all of the wealth out of those families and funneling that over to cover the rest.
Wow.
There's just nothing left. I keep reminding people, I'm a baby music teacher. I teach babies music classes. I'm trying so hard, but I'm here by myself because everyone else signed the NDA. And I don't know how to do it without people like you.